With the help of Hashem, we are learning Yoma Daf Samach Gimel. We began at the end of last year quoting a Braisa on Daf Samach Beis Amid Beis. The Braisa spoke about two scenarios. A person took the two seirim that were designated for the avodah of the Pedic to make the goydel. Says the Braisa that if prior to the goydel being done to these two seirim, a person went and shechted either one of them or both of them bachutz. Bachutz means outside the temple complex, and as we will continue to learn, a pasuk in Vayikra and Parshas Acharei Mos, right after the Torah finishes recording the whole avodah of Yom Kippur, the Torah writes that if a carbon that was supposed to be brought was brought outside, and the Torah says the words ve'el, pesach, oil, moyed, loy, heviyoy, and he didn't bring it where it should have been brought, etc., then v'nichras ha'yishahu. From there we learned that a carbon that was ra'ui, fit to be brought inside the oil moed, if it was brought outside, that is where the person b'shoigig is chayv chatos, b'mezid is chayv karos. If a carbon that was taka designated for kachin, if it's not yet fit to be brought inside, even though of course don't bring it outside, but you won't be violating the shchutei chutz. Says the Braisa clause number 1, that these two seirim that are going to be used for the goydel, if prior to the goydel they were slaughtered outside, you will be chayiv. If the goydel was already made, then the Braisa differentiated. The one that was lashem, if someone slaughtered it outside, chayiv. If the one la'azazel was geshachten outside, pater. And we began, the end of last year was focusing on the first clause of the Braisa. The problem we had is that since the goydel was not yet done, so neither of them can be brought, neither of them can be lashem, you didn't even do the goydel. How is it fit to be brought inside, which is this criterion that's needed for you to be chai for shchutei chutz? So we quoted Rav Chizda that said like this, you're right, prior to the goydel, neither of them are connected to Lashem as of yet, but since on the day of Yom Kippur, you have the musaf of Yom Kippur, which comes from a sa'ir, and this is the same animal type. Furthermore, if these two animals, or one of them, will be used for the musaf, it's going to be a valid musaf. So Rav Chizda subscribes to the hoyel principle, since it could be used for musaf, even though you know you won't. It's considered fit enough for you to apply the din of shchutei chutz. Then we added a concept that it will be the foundation for the hemshech of the sugya. And that foundation is that there are times that we say that hoyel, and there are times that we don't say hoyel. So far we are applying it to the following. If something needs to happen to the animal itself, not physically, but halachically, if there is a mitzvah connected to this animal, prior to which you can't do the avodah, then we don't say hoyel, even though we will do that mitzvah, and sometime, even today, it's going to be fit. The mitzvah wasn't yet done to it. But if there are things that need to happen prior to bringing the carbon, but it's not a mitzvah connected to this carbon, like we explained, that you can only bring the musaf on Yom Kippur from the soid after you did many steps prior. Those steps prior have to happen. But it's not a mitzvah connected to this goat. This goat only is going to be used after prior steps. Since the musaf is going to be brought today, even before the prior steps happened, we can already say, hoyel, it's fit for today, and therefore if you slaughtered it outside, you're going to be chayiv, and that was the Rav Chizda's explanation of the Braisa. Now we're going to show where we have other scenarios where we might say hoyel, where we might not say hoyel. And that's going to lead us into a very similar topic, which is something that we spoke about a lot in Masechtas Pesachim, and that is the following. An animal that was designated for a carbon Pesach. If that animal is brought shaloi bizmanoi, it's not brought on the 14th in the afternoon, so then, let me say like this, if it was brought l'shem shlamim, for sure it becomes a valid shlamim. We will have again over here a machloikas between Abdimi's version of Rabbi Yechanan, Ravin's version of Rabbi Yechanan. What happens if it was slaughtered stam? Not l'shem Pesach, not l'shem shlamim. Do we say that any animal that was designated for a Pesach, shaloi bizmanoi, automatically is uprooted and it is a shlamim, or does it need to be uprooted? And that's all going to be connected to our topic of if this Pesach, let's say, does not need to be uprooted for it to be a valid shlamim, and someone goes ahead and takes this Pesach, shaloi bizmanoi, and shechts it chutz, he will be chayiv for shchitas chutz, because it was ra'ui to be brought as a shlamim. If you're going to ascribe to those who hold that even though a Pesach Shaloi Bizmanei could be made into a Shlamim, but you have to make it into a Shlamim, and before you uprooting it into a Shlamim, it remains a Pesach Shaloi Bizmanei may not be brought, so it's not fit to be brought, then if you would check this animal bachutz, you won't be chayiv. With another nuance, even if when you shechted it bachutz, you had the machshava l'shem shlamim, you uprooted it, but there's another din that uprooting a carbon bachutz is not an uprooting, so it wasn't uprooted. If it needed to be uprooted and it wasn't, you're going to be patur. So we're going to learn a lot more applications of this din of shchitas chutz and how it only applies to that which is ra'ui, to ve'el pesach oil moyed lo hevi'oi is the sin. It has to be ra'ui to come into the oil moyed. And then on Daf Samach Gimel, Amid Beis, we're going to come back to Yom Kippur, and we're going to be learning that there is a special limud that teaches us that the soid hamishtaleyach may not be designated for the soid hamishtaleyach if it is a mechusar zman. Now, a mechusar zman means if it is premature. Now, the truth is that you have various premature applications. The most known mechusar zman is a pasuk that we read almost every yontif. Parshas Emor, that all karbanos may not be brought as a carbon during their first 7 days. It's only umiyoyim hashmini ve'hala yeratzel karban lashem. What happens if a ksoid hamishtaleyach is not 7 days old? Now we began the Pedic learning that has to be similar, but the Mishnah spoke about not age, we spoke about color, we spoke about height, we spoke about value, financial value. What happens if one animal is going to be 8 days old and the other animal is 7 days old? So even though the soid hamishtalech is not being slaughtered, we have a limud that teaches us that you cannot designate a premature soid lazazel. The question that we will deal with on Amid Beis with many answers, the question will be, why do you b'chlal need a limud? Don't forget that when you take the two goats, you don't take one for the soid hamishtalech. You don't take one for the lazazel. You take two and you don't know yet which one is which. And there is a rule that you can only put two animals in the goydel if both of them are fit lashem. If the animal is premature, so it's never fit lashem, so you can never make a goydel. So anyways, a premature animal is excluded from it ever being a soid hamishtalech. So we're going to deal with the question, why do we have to have a braisa that has a special limud? I mean, the bottom line will be that a premature mechusar zman is not fit for soid hamishtalech. But why do we need a pasuk when it should be self-understood that it's not shayich? And we're going to have phenomenal out-of-the-box cases where there can be a soid hamishtalech that might not need to undergo a goydel. And therefore, in those unusual cases, one without a limud might have thought, since you're not slaughtering it, so you don't apply that only umayoyim hashmini v'hala yeratzel karban. Nevertheless, the soid hamishtalech is viewed like a karban, and it also has to have the right age. Just to add that premature doesn't only mean under 8 days old. I'll just give you one other example. That will be hopefully we'll get there today, that there's a din in the Torah that oisoi, that the mother and a child may not be slaughtered on the same day. That's a sugya that's not connected to kachum. We learned this in Chulin, whether it's the mother and the child or whether it's the father and the child. How do you define the same day? Or however you define that, you can't slaughter a mother and a child on the same day. It's shayich that the soid hamishtalech, after it being designated already to the soid, the mother was slaughtered. Don't jump chilul Yom Kippur. If someone was a chayla mesukin, and the only animal was available to shecht was the mother, you shecht to save a life. Now this is not fit. Now this is also called a mechusar zman. That will be the final Gavaldika insight. And that is why we need to have a limit, just for example, that since it's a mechusar zman, it's not fit for the soid hamishtalech. And what we're going to basically leave off, whether it is at the end of today or coming into tomorrow and tomorrow's daf, is that there will be scenarios where we have many animals. Because if one became unfit, you have to designate a new one, not by replacing the one that was unfit, by bringing two. And then we're going to have to begin unpackaging already the subsequent dafim. What happens with the superfluous animals? Which ones are used? Which ones are not used? Whether it's a yirat sheyistoiv or shitas Rabbi Yehuda, that it's left to die. Okay, Chavra, let us start. This is Gavaldik. We left off 4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. We just clarified shitas Rab Chizda, differentiating between an animal that has a chesroin maise begufay, not fit, we don't say hayil, versus the musaf that doesn't have a chesroin maise begufay, we say hayil. Amar Avina, 3 lines from the bottom. Hashta the Amar Rab Chizda. Now that we established, or we inferred from Rab Chizda, that mechusar hagrala is considered kemechusar maise dami. As we spoke out to Rashi, it's very important, even though you're not doing the geidel in the goof physically, even if you, not only if you need to have even the hanach is not big gufay, but furthermore, many yeshitas hold, you don't even have to put the lottery down on the back of the animal, but it's halachically begufay. So now, if a shlamim was slaughtered before the Pesach of the Azara was opened, it's invalidated. Because it says, and this is going back to the beginning of Vayikra, Pesach means it has to be slaughtered in the passageway of the oil mayed. It has to be an opened, for it to be a passageway. It's not a door, it's a passageway. And we learned bisman shu pasuach v'lo bisman shu noel. Daf Samach Gimel zokt. The Gemara says Ravina that if you took the shlamim and shachaton bachutz koidem sheniftechu dalsa saheichol, you will be pater. Why will you be pater? My tama, because mechusar pesicha ke mechusar ma'asadami. Guys, it flows based on the Rashi. Rashi explains that fit or unfit, when we say hoyel, when we don't say hoyel. We don't say hoyel if there is a mitzvah that's connected to this carbon. The din that a shlamim can only be geshachten when the dalsois azara are opened is a din in the shlamim. It's not touching the shlamim. It's a din in the shlamim. Just a contrast. The din that the soir of Musaf, of Yom Kippur, can only be brought at its designated time and not prior. It's not a din, there is no mitzvah in the Musaf. Or let me word it differently. When you went through all the steps on Yom Kippur, and now you are up to the Musaf of the Soyer of Yom Kippur, those previous steps are not here. They were done already. They're not here. The din that the door has to be open when you bring the shlamim, it's a din that when you bring the shlamim, the door has to be opened. So it's a mitzvah connected to this shlamim, not what needed to happen prior. It's not like you opened up the door, you fulfilled the mitzvah. It's not about the opening of the door. It's about the effect that the passageway is now a passageway. You got that? That's Tosfos Yeshanim on the next daf explaining this. So this is considered a mitzvah begufay. Or if it's a mitzvah begufay and it's lacking, so you cannot bring it inside, so you're not chayiv. How great! I frekti gemara umi isleil Rab Chizda the holding of hoyel. I mean, whenever you don't need a mitzvah begufay. Don't forget the original answer of Rab Chizda explaining the first clause of the Braisa. The Braisa says that before the goydel, if you shechted either of them achutz or both, you're chayiv. Right? You can't be chayiv. You're chayiv two chatois b'shoigeg. You didn't do the goydel. Hoyel, they are ra'ui for the musaf, but you have to subscribe to the principle of roi. Forget about it's not begufay. It's not begufay, which is why you can subscribe to it. That will be a stira bein Rab Chizda le Rab Chizda. This is all the first version, that the first statement was Rab Chizda, and this statement is Rab Chizda. Pesach sheshachatoy bachutz b'shari yemais hashana. You have a carbon Pesach. Let's go back to Pesachim. And that animal, if you will not bring it on the 14th bisman Pesach, so either it's automatically a shlamim. That will be the whole nuance difference between the next couple of lines in the Gemara. You certainly could bring it l'shlamim, so it's fit. So it says, Rab Chizda said that if you brought it l'shmai, you had in mind l'shem Pesach bachutz. Well, that animal lepesach bifnim is for sure not fit. because it's not on Erev Pesach, and therefore you're pater. Because it's not to ra'ui to bring it al Pesach Olamai. But if we're going to focus now, this is all Rashi's girsa, we're going to focus on this last statement of Rab Chizda. If you brought it bachutz shaloi lishmai, now if you would have brought it bifnim shaloi lishmai, it would have been a bona fide shlamim. It's ra'ui to be brought, and therefore you're going to be chayiv. End of quote of Rab Chizda. Now we're going to focus on the last statement of Rab Chizda. I know that if you were to focus on the first statement, you would come to an opposite conclusion, and that's a big problem, and Tosfos disagrees with Rashi, but we don't have time for that. Let's focus Gemara Rashi. Taima, the last statement, the Shaloi L'Shmoi, that is when you're chayiv. What does that imply? Let's only make the inference from the Sefer. Even though Rashi is goydis deresh, Tosfos is not even goydis deresh. That hastama, if you bring it bachutz without any intention, right? Then lishmoi, who it sounds like it remained lishmoi, it remains a Pesach, and therefore you pater. But if Rab Chizda subscribes to hoyel, which he does, va'amai lema, why don't we say hoyel v'roi shaloi lishmoi b'fnim? Clearly, shaloi lishmoi, he himself said is going to be chayiv. So even though it was tam, but it's ra'ui. Great question. So does Rab Chizda subscribe to the principle of hoyel or not? Answers the Gemara, hachiyashta, gavaldik. Over there, meaning by Pesach, this is based on the premise, which will, a machloikas, but that's his shita, that if you don't purposefully have a machsheves shaloi lishmoi by a Pesach shaloi bezmanoi, it remains a Pesach. Don't forget, and a Pesach shaloi bezmanoi is not ra'oi. You could uproot it, but you need to uproot it. Boi akira, it needs uprooting. And since you did not uproot it, it's not fit. We can't say hoyel. Over here, we're speaking about by the so'ir, even though you purchased it for the goydels se'irim, but you don't need to uproot it to use it for musaf, because both goats, La Shem and La Zazel, are called achatos, and as is the musaf, the soid, on Yom Kippur is oichet achatos. Hai loy boyi akira. So since it doesn't need uprooting, that's why, yes, Rab Chizda uses the principle of hoyel. And this next line, we're not changing anything. The Gemara doesn't have to repeat anything. But this problem of Rab Chizda's answering the first clause of the Braisa, the contradiction of Rab Chizda's statement regarding the Pesach, others, Rabba bar Shimi masne lohu, everything with Rabba. It was Rabba that entered the ratio of the Mishnah by saying the words Hoyel v'royel l'soy ranasa b'chutz, and then v'kashilei the Rabba ad the Rabba, and then they had the Rabba saying this statement that Pesach shashachatei b'chutz etc. Shaloi l'shmoi chayev, from where we make the inference that if it was stama, you'll be pater, and the answer will be the same. Okay, now the hemshech is gavaldik. The whole answer, stated Rab Chizda or Rabba is predicated that you need to make akira. The Gemara is going to, in between the lines, show you not everyone subscribes that it needs akira. And we learned this in Psachim. There are those who opine that a Pesach, shaloi bezmanoi, is already a shlamim. And by the way, according to those opinions, if you bring it stama, bachutz, you'll take a bichayiv. You'll be chayiv because it's a shlamim that is roi to be brought b'fnim. Now, how did that question manifest like this? Rav Dimi used to come to Bavel, and it's how common is it, very common, that after we quote that which Rav Dimi brought from Toras Eretz Yisrael, a few lines later we're going to have a Raven coming with a different version, all quoting Rabbi Yechanan. Gewaldig. So Chiyos Rav Dimi, Omar Rav Yirmiyah, Omar Rav Yechanan, Pesach sheshachatu bachutz, b'shari yemais hashana. Listen to his version. Bein lishmoi, bein shaloi lishmoi, always pater. Wow. And Omar Rav Dimi, that I want you to know that I'm Nita L'Shmaitza Kamei Rabbi Yirmiyah. And what was asked, because he quoted Rabbi Yirmiyah quoting Rabbi Yechanan. So when Rabbi Yirmiyah was teaching that, so the Chevra jumped and they said, Bish Laima L'Shmai, we get it. If you shecht a carbon, Pesach, Shaloi Bezmanoi, L'Shmai, Bachutz, yeah, you're pater. Hoyel, the Holei Chazi lay, because it's not fit to be brought inside. But if someone is going to bring this carbon, right, which is B'shari Yemais Hashana, and they have in mind Shaloi L'Shmai, then why would you be exempt? HaChazi lei Shaloi L'Shmai B'fnim. Right? So Amar Li, so Rabbi Yechanan or Rabbi Yirmeh responded, explaining the Torah of his Rabbi Yechanan. No. All based on the premise, this version, that it has to be uprooted. And even though the one who brought it bachutz had a machsheves sheloi l'shmoi, any uprooting that's done bachutz is completely ignored. It has no significance. Akiras chutz lav shmo akira. And based on the premise that it has to be uprooted, and what you had in mind bachutz is insignificant, it's discounted. So what is it? It's a Pesach. A Pesach is not ro'ui to be brought b'fnim. And therefore, if you bring it b'chutz, you're pater. So all of this is based on the concept that a Pesach, b'shari yemais hashana, needs to be uprooted. However, ki asar ravin, Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Gavaldik, the same Rabbi Yirmiyah, quoting the same Rabbi Yechanan, no, differently. Pesach sheshachat b'chutz b'shari yemais hashana, min hakotze l'hakotze, even more than Abchizda or than Abba, bein lishmai, bein shaloi lishmai, I don't care what you had in mind b'chutz, you will always be chayiv. What are you talking about? V'atanan, this is the Mishnah Chevra that we have in Zivachim. Now, the Mishnah in Zivachim is speaking about the example that we are using to show you that Shchitas Chutz is only a violation of Kares and Chatos if it was fit to be brought inside. One of the fit is it cannot be premature, it cannot be Mechusar Zman, which generally means it's not 8 days old. So that was the first thing in the Mishnah, that if you took a korban and you slaughtered it outside, but it is premature, right, you're not going to be chayiv. And now the Mishnah elaborates. What's pshat mechusar zman? Mechusar zman, whether it is begufay, like we said, it's not 8 days old yet, or beba'alim, the animal is old enough, but the time to bring it has not yet arrived, and the Mishnah explains the exehu mechusar zman beba'alim. So gavaldik examples: Azov and Azava and a Yeledis and a Mitzoida. Some of them have to wait 7 days. Right? There's a seder until when? When do you bring it on the 8th day? The 8th day didn't come. So the owner cannot bring it yet. So let's go. If sheikrivu chatasam va'ashamam bachutz, a detail, that is when they're pater. We're saying that detail because a korban, oila, and a dava can always be brought b'fnim, even if it's coming from a zav. He cannot bring his mechusrei kippurim karbanos prior to the right time. So what's called mechusras man ba'alim karbanos that can never be made into an adava. But oiloi say hen of the above, ushlamei hen of the above, even though that he had designated these karbanos for the chisur kippurim, but since they could be brought now b'fnim, bachutz chayav. Atkan, the Mishnah in Zivachim, and v'amar Rab Chilkiya bar Toivi, that when the Mishnah said that the asham that's brought bachutz is pater loishanu elo l'shmoi. Wow! But if it was brought bachutz sheloi l'shmoi, now Chevra, let's nacham al chazer, the first opening shot of the whole Zivachim. The Mishnah says that kol asvachim, if you shechted it sheloi l'shman. For example, if you shechted an asham l'shem oila, so even though they're loy alu liba'alam l'shem chayva, but they're kshedim, they become an oila. So Rab Chilkiya added that if you had a machsheva shaloy l'shmoi, by the asham, since it becomes an oila, you're right, going to be chayiv. Okay, and now asks the Gemara, this is all how we are challenging this latter version of Amar Rabbi Yechanan, l'shmoi miya pater. Everyone holds that if you bring the asham or the chatzas l'shmoi pater. Why? Amai nema hoyel v'ra'uyin shaloi l'shmoi bifnim. They also could have been brought, like Rab Chilkiya is saying, bifnim shaloi l'shmoi. No, we're speaking about the asham. I want to make that clear because a chatos and a pesach, if they are brought shaloi l'shma, they're b'chlal invalidated. So here the Gemara is going to bring a similar answer that we said to Farenfer the Stira Rab Chizda or the Stira Rabba. So answers the Gemara Hachiyashta over there, which is by the Asham. You need to have Akira. Prior to Akira, it's not fit. Over here, the real underlying different girsa of Ravin versus Rav Dimi is like we spoke out. A Pesach b'shari yemois hashana, Ravin holds that Rav Yirmiyah, Rav Yechanan hold, it doesn't need to be uprooted. It's automatically a shlamim. Hacha Pesach b'shari yemois hashana, automatically a shlamim. Gewaldig. Now, do we accept Rav Dimi's version or Ravin's version? Says the Gemara, Rav Ashi masna chayiv, bein l'shmoi, bein shaloi l'shmoi. Not like Ravin. And Rav Yirmiyah Midifti has Rav Dimi's version, Pater, both scenarios. Why? Like we learned above. Because he holds Pesach B'Shari Mois Hashana is not automatically a shlamim. It could be made into a shlamim by Akira. And even both cases, not Rav Chizda's versions, Rav Dimi's version, even if Itaka had in mind Shaloi L'Shmai, or that was an Akira, he also subscribes that Akira's Chutz, Lav Shema Akira. And he obviously argues with Rab Chilkiah Bar Tuvi, because Rab Chilkiah Bar Tuvi said that when the Mishnah in Zevachim says that if the Asham is brought, you're going to be pated. However, he says that if you bring the Asham Bachutz, Shaloi L'Shmai, it makes it into an Oila, and your Chayiv, obviously Rab Chilkiah Bar Tuvi holds that a Machsheves of Akira Bachutz is valid. Okay, Gevaldik. Now let's come back to Yom Kippur. So Amar Mar, we learned in the Baraisa. We're going back to the Baraisa that we learned at the end of last year. At Khan, we explained, my friends, the first clause of the Baraisa. Again, the Baraisa writes that both of the Seirim of Yom Kippur, if both of them, or either one of them, were slaughtered by Chutz, said the Baraisa, actually, Higril Chayev al Shneim. And for that, we needed to have this Gavaldike explanation. Taka, you're not chayiv because one of them could have been the Soil Hashem. No one says that. Because you need to do a maise begufoi, which is the goydel. Why are you chayiv? That was the whole beauty, Rab Chizda or Rabba, because it could have been brought for the Soil of Yom Kippur. Not now, you have to wait. But chesra in boy bayoim is not called a chesra. Then the Baraisa added clause number 2 that we're going to go back to. What was the second case? The Baraisa says that Misha Higr Aleim, I'm reading the Baraisa, then Chayiv shall shame upater shel azazel. Why are you pater shel azazel? That's the din. Because since this animal was designated la azazel, it may no longer be brought b'fnim. When does Hashem say that if you shecht an animal b'chutz, you chayiv karas, or God forbid chatos, that if it was ra'ui lehevioi el pesach el moed? That's what we're going to learn right now. Amar mar, Misha Higr Aleim chayiv al shel shame upater al shel azazel. So what's the source? That if it's not fit, we keep on quoting it, but that's the source. So Tan Rabbanan, it's Gavalik. This is Vayikra Yud Zayin is also Achrei Mois. It's not about Yom Kippur. This is about all karbonis. The pasuk begins, Ish mebeis Yisrael. Asher yishchat, whether it is a shoyer, an ox, a cow in that kind of bakar category, or a kesev, sheep, or yez, or a goat. B'machne chevra chumash Rashi. B'machne means a machne leviyah. Machne leviyah means it was very close to the temple, but it wasn't in the temple. It wasn't in the Beis Hamikdash. Or even worse, it's really the same thing. Oy, asher yishchat michutz lamachne, out of machne leviyah. It's both the same that it wasn't geshachten the el pesach oil moed lohevi. Or here pesach oil moed means it wasn't done in the right place. Lahakriv karben lashem. These are seemingly extra words. I just want to add. The pasuk writes lifnei mishkan Hashem. Dam yichashev lo ishahu dam shafach v'nichras. That's the pasuk. Daf samach gimel amid beis. So now, as we mentioned, that the Torah writes vel pesach al moed lo yaviyoi lahakriv karben lashem. Why did Bachlal, the pasuk, have to write the words lahakriv karben lashem? Now, what the Gemara is doing over here is it's pashat skipping a part of a brayso. When the Gemara was written, it was expected that we should know it by heart. By the times of Rashi, we don't know it by heart. We have to read the Rashi pashat. If not, you won't understand what we're talking about. When the brayso knows, before we read the words I karben shemei ani, it's not going to flow. Look inside the Rashi. I karben shemei ani v'chol. So he said like this: Reisha the brayso b'toyres kahanim hache is. The first thing the Baraisa says is Yochel hashoichet chulin bifnim Yehei chayiv. The pasuk is speaking about shchitas kachim bachutz. You would think that if you take a non-consecrated animal bifnim, you're going to be chayiv. Why would you think it's chayiv? The Baraisa has a din. The Baraisa has a kal v'chomer. Whatever the kal v'chomer is, it's not negei techap. So the Baraisa answers, that's why it says karben. We were saying the words lahakriv karben lashem. Why do you have to write that? You wrote the El Pesach Olamoid Lo Yeviyoi. Good. So the Torah is telling you Koren to tell you that al hakorban hu chayiv, ve'ein chayiv al chulin. That's the exclusionary limit from Koren, that chulin bifnim is asur, but there's no chiyuv kodesh. Now asks the Braisa, top of the line, how do you know that the Koren is coming to exclude the punishment for chulin bifnim? Maybe Koren, maybe you chayiv on chulin bifnim. Not only are you chayiv for kachim b'chutz, kodesh, chatos, and chulin bifnim, maybe Koren is coming to add even a greater sin. That if the bedek habayis has a Koren that was never designated for the mizbeach, someone donated an animal. And by the way, we're going to learn in kachim that really lechatchila one should never donate an animal to the bedek habayis if it's unblemished and fit for the mizbeach. Don't do that. But if one did it, it become consecrated. Now, if someone were to take such an animal and to shecht it outside, asks the Braisa, maybe Hashem adds the words, right, lahakriv korban, to tell you that you're also chayiv kodesh. 1 second. Where do we find that an animal that's not laguf, not lamizbeach, no kedu, where do we find that it's called korban? One time in the whole Torah. In Parshas Matos, after we won the war against the Midyanim, and the Torah is speaking about the animals that we got, and we divided the spoils, so we gave a gift to the Kohanim, and the Torah uses the words korban. One time we find a korban on an animal that is not imbued with Kedushas Haguf, Kedushas Mizbeach. So asks the Braisa, if you only have the word korban, maybe Shemei Ani, not only don't use it to exclude Chulan Bifnim, maybe include Afilu Kachem Bedek Habayis, which are called korban Ke'inyan Shenemar, that one time in Parshas Matos, Vanakriv es korban Hashem. So how do you know that you are using the word korban to exclude Chulan Azara? So Talmud Leimer, so we go back. Before you have the word korban, it says, Vel Pesach Oil Moyed Loy Hevi Oy. Now that implies that this pasuk is only speaking about Kol Haroi LePesach Oil Moyed, not a korban lebedek habayis, not a chulin animal. Only on such an animal, which is a bona fide korban, chayav olav b'chutz. And Kol she'ein haroi LePesach Oil Moyed, ein chayavin olav b'chutz. That is the source for the din, for the second clause in the Braisa, that after the goydel, the so'ir la'azazel is not royal LePesach Oil Moed. It's supposed to be pushed off the cliff. And tak, if someone slaughtered that animal b'chutz, which he shouldn't have, he won't be chayiv kodesh, he won't be chayiv chatos. Now let's continue learning the Braisa. Oitzi elu she'ein royal LePesach Oil Moed. However, still the Braisa itself asks, so all I did was I excluded that the word korban doesn't mean bedek habayis. But how do you know? We're going to skip paras chatas. That's not the girsa. Rashi takes it out. Oh, maybe the soiramishtaleach who was slaughtered outside. The Braisa is asking, maybe you should be chayiv paras chatas. Why is that? Why is that? Because shu ra'ui lavoi al pesach oil moyed oy gewalt. How is it ra'ui? Not to shecht it, not to shecht it. Where is the goydel done, my friends? We learned this in the last perakim. The goydel is done inside the oil moyed azara. It's done in the azara. Gevaldik. More than that, not only is the goydel done over there, but as we are going to learn soon, before the ish iti took the soir hamishtaleach, the kohen gadol did smicha on it. And he needed to do it inside the Azara. So, enachanami, it's not going to be slaughtered, but the Torah doesn't say the word slaughter. The Torah says, Vel Pesach oil moyoid loy hevioi. The soira mishtaleach needs the hevioi el Pesach oil moyoid gevaldik. Shu roi means it has to attack. Not only fit. Shu roi lo Pesach oil moyoid. So now the Braisa adds, the extra words wasn't only lahakriv korban. The Torah says, lahakriv korban lashem. Weiter an extra word. Why lashem? Lashem means not only you're going to do something with it in the azara. Korban lashem means, misha meyuchadim, lashem means as a korban, as sacrificing it, shechting it in the azara. Yatsu elu, again, whether it's going to paraschatos or not, let's focus on the soira mishtaleach, she'ein meyuchadim lashem. Beautiful. Clear that the soira mishtaleach, after the goydel, if someone slaughtered it b'chutz, you're not chayiv for shchitas chutz. Asks the Gemara, this limud of the Braisa uses Lashem to exclude the Soir HaMishtaleach. That goes 180 degrees to another Braisa that uses the Lashem to include a Soir HaMishtaleach. Where's that? Fragt die Gemara, Lashem lo hoitziu v'riminu Parshas Emoir. When the pasuk is speaking about this din of mechusar zman, the classical mechusar zman is that the Torah says that for the first 7 days all animals should be with their mothers. It's only umiyoim hashmini v'ala yeratzel l'karban lashem. So when it says yeratzel l'karban, isha lashem. So isha, a fire, eilu ishim, right? That when you burn something on the mizbeach, right, it has to be 8 days old. Okay, maybe don't bring it when it's 8 days old. Can you sanctify an animal prior to it being 8 days old? You're not going to bring it then. Can you do that? No, because the Torah says yeratze lekarban. So the word karban, which did not need to be written, it could have says yeratze isha lashem, is coming to teach you that even the act of consecration should only be done when it's 8 days old. Then adds the Braisa Lashem oy gewalt. It says lekarban isha Lashem. That's leraboy soir HaMishtaleach. That what? That a soir HaMishtaleach that is less than 8 days old cannot be a soir HaMishtaleach. Now we spoke out in the intro. That will be the end of Daf going into Daf Samach Daled. Why would we even think it's possible? Forget about that question. Lashem is including soir HaMishtaleach in this din. Has to be 8 days old for Soir HaMishtaleach. So is Lashem excluding or is Lashem including? And the answer is so fundamental, it depends on the context. It depends on the context. Amarava hacha minyana dekra, hasa minyana dekra, v'hacha minyana dekra. Hasam over there, it's our din. Hasam means shchitei chutz. When the Torah writes ve'el pesach oil moyed, and we said that's lerabois Lashem, lerabois. So now that there's another word, if you're going in one direction and God adds a word, it's to change course. So Lashem will be Lohoitzi. And indeed, it's not only El Pesach Choyel Moed, it has to be El Pesach Choyel Moed Lashem. And if a Soir HaMishtalech was Geshachtem Bachutz, you won't be Chayiv. But over here, meaning in the din of the Bayoim Hashmini, since Leisha is Lohoitzi, that you cannot burn it if it's 7 days old, right? And you cannot burn it, and you would have thought only something that will be burnt is included, and you therefore would have thought that the Soir HaMishtaleach is not included, so now the Lashem is Lerabos. Okay. But that's just a detail. Context will tell you whether some words are going to be used to include or to exclude. But now that we mentioned this Lashem, so clearly we're speaking about that Shchutei Chutz, not shchutei chutz, mechusar zman, that a soir HaMishtaleach is included in the din of mechusar zman. Why did we even need that? Fragt die Gemara, Tame de Rabbi Rachmana. Haloi Rabbi, if not for that extra Lashem, in this context is to include, what's the Havamina? That a soir HaMishtaleach could become consecrated even if it is mechusar zman. How is that even shayach? Don't forget, you don't designate an animal to be la'azazel. You get two se'irim. They have to undergo the goydel. You don't know which one is going to win the goydel. And there's a klal. V'ho'ein ha'goydel koiveya elo b'ro'il Lashem. Both animals have to be fit for the Lashem. Clearly the Lashem is only 8 days old. That's for sure included in Yeratze l'karban isha avada. So, b'derech mamela, we know that the Soir HaMishtaleach will have to be at least 8 days old. So why do you have to have a pasuk to include it in the prohibition? And we're going to have various approaches. Let's go, we have enough time. Approach number one, Amar Rabbi Yosef, that this Braisa must follow the Shita of Chanana Mitzri. Unlike our Mishnah. Now we're going to start going back to the Mishnah that we had in the beginning of the Perek and Daf Samach Beis. The Tanya, Chanana Mitzri. What did we learn in Rabbi Yehuda? Right, if one of them, if the dam spills out, if the Soir HaMishtaleach dies, it's all invalidated. Chanana Mitzri says like this: Afilu dam b'kois. You know, dam b'kois is you made the goydel, the Soir Lashem, you did the shchita, you already slaughtered it, the blood is in the mizrak. What happens, Chevra Halt Kop, if now that the blood is in the Mizrach, the La'azazel dies? You can only use the dam of the Soyer Lashem when its counterpart is living. So right now, the dam is unfit. Right now, it's dachui, it's rejected. Could it be rectified? Now, when we learned Daf Samach Beis, we already spoke out that Bechlal in the cases of the Mishnah, whenever you do have to take another pair and make a new geidel, and the Mishnah says that Hasheni Yira Ache Yistoiv, that has to be clarified. What does our Mishnah hold? Which one is the Sheni? But coming back to our case of Chanan HaMitzri, so the Soyer Lashem is good, the blood is in the cup, the Soyer La'azazel dies. So says Koren Publisher, maybe chaveroi umezaveg olav. It sounds like all you need to do is to bring one new animal as the soira mishtalech. That's what the havamina is. Now the chiddush of Koren Publisher is that we don't say hoil v'nitcha nitcha. We don't say that since before you have a new soir la'azazel, for sure the dam cannot be brought. So it underwent a moment of rejection. Koren Publisher holds that if you rectify the reason why it was rejected, you reinstate it. You can use the dam. Opposite Rabbi Yehuda in the Mishnah Daf Samach Beis that holds the dam has to be poured out. The Havamina was Rabbi Yosef's understanding in Koren Publisher is you don't even have to make a new geidel. Now it's gavaldik. So in this case, according to Koren Publisher, right? You know the whole din is that when you ein ha geidel kaiveya ela b'roy lashem, there's no geidel here. Without the extra lashem, which includes the isur of mechusar zman to the soira mishtaleach, one might have thought that the soira mishtaleach can be brought when it's 7 days old. Gavaldik. For that you need the limit. The Gemara rejects this answer. You know why? Because we don't understand Koren Publisher with the way we just explained it. The chiddush of Koren Publisher is that something can become nitcha and then it can become re-included. But how do you get a soy la'azazel? Even Koren Publisher holds you have to bring two and you have to make a new geidel. And one will be la'azazel. The one la'azazel will be the shidduch of the dam bakois. According to Koren Publisher. Okay, let's come over here. Says the Gemara, is only that he does not agree with Rabbi Yehuda to the concept of the chuyin that we'll speak about in next year. The chuyin, everyone holds that while there is no soyer la'azazel, the dam lashem is dachui. No one debates that. Question is, can you reinstate it? Can you rectify it? So Rabbi Yehuda says no, and Chanan says yes. But the leis lei hagrola mishamat lei. Koren Publisher never said you just buy one so'ir. No. Dilma, maisi, umagro. Koren Publisher, why would you hold on like we learned in our Mishnah? You bring two animals and you make a geidel. And here we're back to our question. The moment you have to bring two animals, and we have this klal that we said before that ain't ha-geidel kaveya ela b'royel Hashem, and royel Hashem, which is isha, for sure has to be moyim hashmini. So b'derech mamela, azazel will be included in the prohibition. Next answer. Ela Amar Rabbi Yosef, he accepted that he didn't understand good pshat in Koren Publisher. It must be that the Braisa that uses Lashem, right, to include La Rabbi Soira Mishtaleach follows the sheet of Rab Shimon. And Rab Shimon explicitly says that Meis Echad Mehem, that means you made the geidel, and either one of them died, I don't care which one died, Rab Shimon disagrees with our Mishnah Daf Samach Beis. All he says is, Mevi Chaveroi Shloi Ba'agrola. So in the case where the one La'azazel died, all you need to do is, you have to bring a new animal La'azazel. Now, Rab Shimon is Gavaldi, because Rab Shimon doesn't say you don't need a geidel. Of course you need a geidel. You made a geidel. He says that the hagrola that was made is extended to the replacement. No, it's the dead animal, so to say, the geidel that was done to it is passed on. The baton is passed on to the new one. Now, here you have to have, according to Rab Shimon, a limud that this soira mishtaleach has to be 8 days old because you're not making a geidel on it. Gavaldik. So that's the first accepted answer, or the second answer that's brought down. Ravina Amar, another approach. Gavaldik going show humam v'chiluloi al acher. What's this muhumam v'chiluloi acher? Let's look inside Rashi. 3-4 lines before the bottom of the Amid. Ravina Amar ki it's the mechusar zman ki going show humam hamishtalech. Another din. The mishtaleach got a blemish. When? After mishehigrul olav. What do you do now? L'kula alma. He's saying you don't make a goydel. He says v'chiluloi al achir. All you need to do is bring one animal and make a chilul. And look, now in Rab Shimon, second to last line in the Amud, v'zeh ein tzarich lahagril, because shaharei mikoyach harishin ba. In other words, the first one dies. That's Rab Shimon. That says you don't have to make a new goydel. If the first one is living and you only cannot use it la'azazel because it has a balmum, and how do you b'chlal know that a balmum is not fit? We'll see soon in the Gemara. Here you don't have to make a new goydel. And therefore, if not for the Lashem, which l'raboy soira mishtaleach, one might have thought it can be 7 days, 6 days. It doesn't have to be 8 days old. Now we just have to say, how do you b'chlal know that if the la'azazel becomes blemished, who says it's a problem? Now, obviously, guys, before you did the goydel, none of the seirim could have had a blemish because of the same rule that ein hagoydel koveya ela b'roy lashem, and anything that's going on the mizbeach may not be a balmum. But after the goydel, how do you b'chlal know that there's an issue? So says the Gemara, Mina Temra, the pasal the Tanya. But it says v'isha, the same pasuk, lo yisitnu mehem. Not this is a pasuk regarding blemished animals. So it says, and to fire don't place. So the fire means that goes the parts of an animal of a balmum. Which ones go to the fire? The ones that are all of it goes to the fire. By all the other korbanos, at least the chalavim go to the fire. Says the Baraisa Vaited Ainli Ela Kula. Maybe if the Torah wouldn't have added the words mayhem, only loisitnu, one erroneously would have thought that what balmum may not be put on the fire only if you put all of the chalavim as a havamina. How do you know that elakulim? But miksasan, if you're only going to put a kazayis on the fire, how do you know that this is also included in this biblical isur? Because the Torah doesn't say loisitnu; it says loisitnu mayhem from it, any part of it. Then when it says mizbeach, that goes to the rizrikas damim. That if you zoyrik the dam of a behema balmum, that's included in the isur. Then when it says lashem nachamol, here the lashem is to include l'raboy soira mishtaleach. One might have thought it's not going on the fire at all. Maybe I don't care if it's blemished. So you have a befedish pasuk that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of a balmum. Now it chaps that you have lashem, you have a pasuk that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of mechusar zman. You have another lashem that includes the soira mishtaleach in the isur of balmum. And the Gemara wants to know, why wouldn't we know one from the other? Because each one is unique. And v'itzrech lemichtav balmum, v'itzrech lemichtav mechusar zman. Because the ikos of rachman mechusar zman, I would have thought there's a way of saying that each one is worse. Mishum de lemate zmanei, that's completely out. Of course, a soira mishtaleach has to be 8 days old. Avol balmum, the mate zmanei. Maybe it's about age. How chashuv age is. Bist a balmum, but at least bist a azaken balmum. Because of rachman balmum, then I would have said, balmum is worse because it's mos. It's a balmum. Abel mechusar zman, it's going to be fit tomorrow, so maybe even now it's good. Deloi mos emaloi. So that's why you needed to have lashem in both cases. The point that Avina makes is you don't have to go to Rab Shimon. L'kula alma, if the soira mishtalech is alive, but it gets blemished, you only have to bring one substitute, and that's why you might have thought, don't run away, one more answer. And the last answer, Rabbi Amr, we spoke about in the intro, why are you limiting mechusar zman to 7-8 days old? There's another type of mechusar zman. That's the isur of shechting the mother and the child on the same day. You have two seirim. You made the goydel. Now, it's not that the soira mishtaleach became blemished. No. What happened is that the mama from the soira mishtaleach, the animal, belonged to Chaim Yankel. Chaim Yankel was obligated to save someone's life because they are ill, they need to eat. V'shachat imoy b'yom HaKippurim. And there is a din that until this man of, however you count the same day, that time has to pass. On Yom Kippur, the time did not pass yet. Without the lashem, you would think you can take the soira mishtalech as it is. Doesn't have a blemish. You're not shechting it. So why is it mechusar zman? That is the lashem. The problem with Rava is, why would we even think that the lashem in Parshas Emoid is excluding? That Parsha is speaking about 7-8 days old. This animal is 8 days old. How do you know that Hashem includes it? Fragt die Gemara, v'chi hai gavna taka mi asid? Why? All you're doing is you're pushing it off the cliff. Maybe that should not be included in the Lashem. The high lav shchitahi. So we're going to conclude today's shiur by saying this nisht emes. The way we understand the avoida of the soira mishtaleach, it's not only called a chatos, it's more than that. Ein v'shachat elo umashach is something that we celebrate in Chassidus. In other words, the avoida of umashach by the soira mishtaleach is done when you push it off the cliff. Pushing it off the cliff is its act of shchita. Ha'amri b'marava, that dichiyasei latzuk, pushing it off the cliff, this is its shchita. So yes, it's called shchita. And therefore, it is going to be included with the Lashem that you may not bring the soira mishtaleach gevaldik. And now where we are up to is we're going to go back to the Mishnah of Samach Beis. The Mishnah spoke about scenarios where you needed to bring two other animals to make a new geidel. You're going to have one of the two, the one that is alive, is going to be doubled. The Mishnah says Hasheni Yira Ache Yistoif, and what's not clear is which one is the Sheni. Is the first the Sheni or is the second the Sheni? To be continued.